So let's get underway. Our speaker tonight, welcome to our March edition of Zoom Seekers. And our speaker tonight is Mike Emmerman, who is a very well-known disaster preparedness expert, and he deals professionally with a lot of disaster response and stuff like that, some of which he'll get into tonight perhaps, but he's a big-time major league disaster guy. It's not the fender bender on the corner, but like terrorist attacks and stuff, little stuff like that. So, but he also has been a diver for 60 years, he was mentioning a little while ago. So he knows a thing or two, and he'll probably impart some of that to you. And in fact, this talk is based on when he was doing some research, I think it was in the 1990s, and just noticed some parallels between things you do in real life, things you do in dive life, and it set off some light bulbs. So without further ado, and you can either unmute and give him applause, or you can just do it on the screen however you want. Please welcome Mike Emmerman. And Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ken. I see some people here I've known for only 100 years. Tabby and Dan Orr and Carl, and that's really great. So thank you all for being here. Let me share my screen. Hold on, let's make sure this works. And
there we go.
And hold on.
Now go full.
Yep.
Just so you guys know, we actually tested this before and it did work. There we go. Same thing we were talking about before, Mike. So it looks good on this end.
Good. Okay. This lecture comes from something that developed in the dive season on the East Coast in 1991, 1992. So bear with me. I have to start. And the reason I talk about driving a car is that the message I had to give to the diving community back in that time, I felt that they wouldn't listen to me if I was talking about diving to start with. We will get to the diving, but I have to start with driving. So here's the question. Do you drive a car or a motorcycle? If you do you consider yourself a good driver? Do you drive at or above the speed limit? Do you drive a few miles per hour above the speed limit knowing that the police will not stop you? Be honest with yourself. Do you drive in the fast lane most of the time? Do you get annoyed when the car in front of you in the fast lane is not moving fast enough? When it starts to rain, do you slow down and move into the right lane? If you do not, this is called a lack of impulse control. Where are you in this picture? Be honest with yourself. When you hit a puddle of water and lose control of the car for a split second, do you then slow down and move over to the right lane? If you do not, this is called lack of mortal fear. Are you still in the fast lane? You may ask, what in heaven's name does this have to do with diving? A lot. And here's why. It may have had a lot to do with why certain extreme exposure technical divers died while diving. 1991, 1992 dive season on the East Coast. And actually some of these cases happened on the West Coast, but most of them are on the East Coast. And as a result of those fatalities, I was brought in to do analysis of what was behind all of this. And a sociologist, a psychiatrist, some other diving experts, and myself worked on this. And I was the lead. And what I'm going to walk you through now is what that driving sort of profile had to do with this. So it was 11 highly experienced and highly trained extreme exposure technical divers lost their lives while diving in that one overlay season. Why did they perish on dives that should not have cost them their lives? We analyzed the dive profiles, we analyzed the dive equipment, analyzed the actions taken before and during the dives. What was clear, they perished, and on those dives that should not have cost them their lives. They're highly experienced, highly trained, they should not have died. The common traits, however, was a lack of impulse control and a lack of mortal fear. And here's what happened. One of the divers was diving with the wrong gas mix because they did not have the money to get the appropriate gas mix. This was a father-son team, and they literally didn't have the money to get the gas mix they needed for this extreme exposure dive, but decided to do this anyway. Lack of impulse control, lack of mortal fear. Using a penetration line to explore a wreck at 230 feet of seawater and not tying off any of the jump lines they had with them when leaving the penetration line to enter the compartment. This was on a wreck that everybody knew that it's on its side. It's been there for many, many decades. It is a mess. More people have died diving the wreck than died in the incident that sunk the wreck. This was off the Andrea Doria. I've been inside the Andrea Doria at 260 and 250. This is a death trap. There are lines, penetration lines that are tied off. Every one of these divers had jump lines with them, but did not tie off the jump lines on going into the compartments. Lack of impulse control, lack of mortal fear. A friend of mine who was a nitrox instructor exceeded the depth time limits for the gas mix he used on his very last dive. He perished. He knew better. He was training other divers not to do this. Lack of impulse control, lack of mortal fear. The actions were all examples of those two. If you think of yourself as a driver and think of the people you know as drivers who are also divers, if they have that tendency as a driver, staying in that left lane, defying Mother Nature, defying road logic and science, what are they going to do on a dive? What would you do on a dive? So in Jill Heinrich's book, Into the Planet, there's a very interesting profile of the 7R personality. It really refers to a personality code DRD4-7R. Shorthand is 7R personality. It's the genome of explorers. And there's a correlation between what Jill wrote relative to lack of impulse control, lack of mortal fear, and some of the traits of the people that she speaks about in her book. And I've got to tell you that in the 60 years to this, actually coming up in a couple of months, it'll be 60 years that I've been diving. And I have been, less so now, the person in the left lane. That didn't matter whether I was driving a car or driving a motorcycle, I was in the left lane. There are things that I had done diving over those many decades where I shouldn't be talking to you now. I made it in spite of myself. This has special meaning for me because I've lost a lot of friends. And when I look back at them, they all had the same traits. The spouse of one of the divers who died, after I did this lecture years ago at a dive show, had come up to me and said that was his personality. That's how he lived. And that's how he died. So what is your personality profile? You consider yourself a good driver and a good diver? Do you abort a dive because you feel that something is just not right? Do you drive in the fast lane? Do you stay in the fast lane when it starts to rain? Do you still stay in the fast lane after losing control of your car for a split second? Do you text while driving? There are things that I've added to this since 1991, 92, because the world's changed. I mean, do you text while driving? During this whole pandemic, do you walk around without a mask in a crowded room? How do you live your life? What do you do on a personality basis? So do I have to ask your spouse or your friends or your children in order to get an honest answer? You know who you are. So if you do stay in the fast lane when it starts to rain, if you do still stay in the fast lane after losing control of your car for a split second, if you do text while driving, stop and think before you take an action while diving. Every time you look at your gauges, picture the people you love or those that love you. When I was trying to get this message across to the wreck diving community on the East Coast, I used that particular example, which was that every time they looked at their gauges, I wanted them to imagine the picture of someone that they loved and cared about, and to just stop for that moment and register what was going on, what they were doing, what their next move would be. So you stop and think before you take any action while diving. Take charge of your impulses, take charge of your choices, take charge of your ego. Dive like your life depends on it. In all the years that I've been doing this, and I know Carl deals with this on an ongoing, almost daily basis, you're dealing with people who end up in trouble in difficult circumstances. Sometimes it's just not their fault, and sometimes they've taken actions that have led to them being at risk. The impulses, the choices, the ego. Drive like your life depends on it. Dive like your life depends on it. This is I just wanted to lay this out for you and just open it up for a discussion, because it's clear to me over the, I don't know, now almost 40 years that I've looked at fatalities of divers and looked at people who are going to be in trouble, and realized that there's a personality profile here. In the many times I have led dive trips to various places around the world, groups that I've led and been on dive boats, those of you who are instructors or dive masters who are in leadership positions know that feeling when you're on the boat and you're watching people suit up, you're watching them put their gear together, that you know which ones are going to be a problem or not a problem. You sense that, you see what they're doing. There's an attitude. And my message to you and the people that you may be teaching and the people that you're diving with is that if you recognize that attitude, then you need to say something, or you need to be extra careful, because this eventually will lead to some kind of issue that may cost them their lives. That one season in 1991-92 was exceptional. I mean, we had the 11 fatalities in that one short season. However, since then, when I look at and use this profile, this analysis, to look at many of the fatalities we've seen since then, I come back to this profile. And in looking at the data that's assembled by folks in the Divers Alert Network or the police departments that I've worked with, and especially the medical examiner's office and others, where they try and piece these things together. Many times, if you can't understand why somebody with incredible experience did something they were trained not to do. So I separate groups. I don't know if any of you remember Shek Exley, but I considered Shek more of an astronaut than just someone doing extreme exposure diving. There are certain divers, that treat those expeditions as though they were going into space. There are backups to backups to backups. There are others who don't. So if you're one of those people who think that you are better than everyone else and that nothing's going to happen to you, that's a problem. So I just pray that if you have a profile like this, that you recognize it. If you're diving with somebody who has a profile like this, you speak to them. I'm open to talk about this, and talk about anything that you want to talk about relative to experiences in life here. But I feel strongly about this. I have relived this issue with divers around the world on looking at cases, fatalities around the world. I'm sure Dan Orr can pipe in on this, and Carl can pipe in on this, where you literally scratch your head and say, why did they do that? What was it that let them do that? So you know who you are, you know how you drive, you know the people around you. I just want you to think about that.
Well, maybe
Somebody
we
asked me
can,
something.
Mike, maybe we can start. I'll put someone on the spot since Jared posted for everybody that he's reading Deep Descent Adventure and Death about diving the Andrea Doria. So, Jared, what are you learning there? And especially since Mike stove the Andrea Doria, what like either puzzles you or fascinated you or whatever?
I just it's amazing how many people will that when they're down there, they'll describe people of being vast experience, right, and they'll still get themselves in trouble, right, or the risk that they take of dropping down a hole and then all of a sudden somebody else is kicking up silt, and then I just you know I find it fascinating, something I would never want to do. The idea of doing any of those kind of extreme diving is something I never want to do, but I find it fascinating that people take these risks and just end up in these situations.
I almost excuse the inexperienced diver who tries to do that and makes a mistake versus the very experienced diver who's done that 100 times and just decides not to tie off the jump line or to use a mix that is inappropriate or whatever they're doing. To me, that's where this profile comes into play. The brand new diver who's deciding to do something extreme and not be trained is an idiot.
Or they don't dive their plan. They have some sort of plan, they come up with whatever plan and they're just going to do this. And then while they're down there, they're like, oh, well, let me try to do, I see this over there. And then they kind of, whatever they pre-planned to do, they just blow it away for whatever opportunity that they saw. It's the other thing I've seen on,
Well, the father and son team who didn't make it back, there was a situation where one got trapped and the other tried to basically save him, and they both died. And there's a question here about whether if they had the right mix, if it would have been different. It certainly would have bought more time, but they decided to do it on the wrong mix. Lack of impulse control, lack of mortal fear.
And maybe speaking of, without trying to put anybody on the spot, of fathers and sons dying, because when you were talking about that, Mike, the one I'm thinking of, in the, I want to say it was 94, out here is when Darren Douglas and his son died on the wreck of the Moody, his 14-year-old son, and like 5 people, got bent and everything else. And where you're mentioning about the idea of, there are people, and you say, oh, these are the people that we're going to be concerned about. There was definitely, because this is for those of you who don't know, this was in the early days of tech diving. And Darren was a big proponent of tech diving and ended up taking his 14-year-old son on, not the first dive, but they went down the second dive on the Moody to free up an anchor. Darren apparently ran low on air. He went up, leaving the son on the bottom with someone else. The kid ran out of air at like 140 feet. Darren realized there was something going on while he was, we think, on a safety stop, went back down to find the kid, and they eventually were found. Darren was trying to tow the child's safety, but both out of air, both dead on the bottom at 140 feet. And there were a lot of us, I think, in the diving community who felt Darren was an accident waiting to happen. We just never thought it was going to be him, that he would do it to himself. So how do you talk to people like that? And when you try, what generally is the response? Because if you've got, the ego and the, you're not, don't have the mortal fear, don't they say, you don't know what you're talking about?
Yes, they do. And sometimes there are people you can't talk to, but sometimes there are. And what's fascinating it's easier to talk to the ones that are married than the ones that are not. And because sometimes you get a buy-in from the spouse, not always male, not always female, but get a buy-in from the spouse who knows that personality and they see it. So there are some people who just cannot be helped. I mean, Carl and I, were not diving on this particular run. Carl and I were not diving the Doria. We were monitoring the divers. And there were 17 instructors, highly experienced, on that run. Carl and I basically diagnosed that 16 of them suffered some form of decompression illness, and all of them kept diving because it was really expensive to get out there, and there was a whole lot of trouble for them, and they just kept diving. So coming off the boat, we were thinking about this. Actually, Carl and I wrote this up at one point, but to watch them trying to get the gear off the boat, basically crippled, and then none of them ever went to a chamber, ever got treatment at all, and some of them didn't live that long after that, but a lot of them did. But they were basically walking disasters.
Well, as everyone knows, the first symptom of the bends is denial. Carl, go.
One of them actually did take oxygen because it had these long hookah hoses with oxygen. And one of the people who we listened to and had bubbles going through, he actually took the oxygen hookah hose down to his cabin, closed the cabin door, and breathed pure oxygen in his closed cabin for 2 hours on a boat sitting out in the middle of the ocean.
How deep was his cabin, Carl?
I don't know, but if there had been a spark in there, we may have been able to get back to the mainland sooner.
Yeah, right. Be a hard landing, but we'd make it back. Speaking about, I just have to mention this because not too long ago, there was an article in Alert Diver about Dick Van. It was sort of honoring Dr. Richard Van. I just have to tell a story about Dick Van, if you don't mind. For those of you who don't know Dick Van, he was at Duke University. He was a renowned researcher in diving physiology. Anyway, this was 1996, and I was a special advisor to the TWA Flight 800 recovery operation. And on that operation, there were the FBI team, the Navy team, the NYPD team, and a couple of other teams. And it's 120 feet of water. Many of those divers had never been diving in 120 feet of water. That's considered deep. In New York City, East River and the other rivers are a maximum of 35, 40 foot of depth. So they were sort of out of their league. And I was responsible for trying to keep them safe. So I got Dick Van on the phone. It was a midnight. And I said to Dick, what's the surface protocol I should put these guys on? Here are the profiles. And Dick Van said, if you can, put them on oxygen as soon as they get to the boat, literally out of the water. Have them breathe while they're dressing down and all of that. Have them breathe surface oxygen for about 45 minutes. I didn't have oxygen, so we went scrambling around for large O2 bottles and connectors and things like that. Ended up putting the team on this protocol. It turned out that the NYPD dive team was the only team not to experience any decompression issues on that operation. Even the Navy divers had chambers on their vessels, so they were set. But all the other teams, and in fact, some teams actually got kicked off the site because they had too many incidents from their team members. But I rarely get to tell that story about Dick Van, but it was because of Dick Van that those divers were actually fine in all of those exposures, and that went on for 2.5 months.
And to be clear, Mike, I think mentioned Dick just died. Not a diving accident, natural causes.
No.
Yeah.
Dick, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Dick lived a long, good life. Yes.
Yeah, Dan, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you have something to add here?
No. I'm just enjoying it, and Mike has done a great job. Appreciate that.
Not trying to put you on the spot.
No.
Robin,
in fact, one other thing that I could mention is that I just actually had an article published in Deeper Blue magazine about normalization of deviance. And that really has to do with people taking shortcuts and that people, in fact, when you look at some of the DAN data, there are people with a large number of dives in the past 12 months. And a lot of that is people who with a lot of experience who are taking shortcuts and continue to do the same shortcut. And it becomes a normalized procedure for them until all of a sudden it doesn't work.
And lack of mortal fear.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Robin, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you commented that it's because of Dan you didn't have any incidents. And I'd like to say it's because of you, because you thought to call and ask for his expertise and you took care of business and acknowledged that maybe somebody else had some extra information that would be helpful.
No, thank you for that. But it was an insane environment. You had we were out on the water for 14 hours a day, and I kept seeing people getting in trouble. And I realized there was one person I could call who would have that answer, and that was Dick Van. I mean, I don't know if any of you remember Bill Hamilton, but Bill Hamilton had made up extreme exposure tables and things like that. And I'd called Bill, but Bill didn't have the experience of applying surface oxygen protocols. He was mainly doing tables. And I knew that Dick Van had done a lot of that work. So it was the call to Dick, and he answered the call. So I'm greatly thankful for his intervention.
Carol, I see you've unmuted. Is that because your hand slipped or because you have a question?
A hand slip.
Oh, I'm
Thanks.
sorry. Well, then I put you on the spot. Do you have a question? All right, fair enough. So what, and maybe just share some thoughts. What are the worst things some of you guys have seen when you've been out?
And Andrea has her hand up.
Oh, who had the hand up?
And Andrea.
Oh, there we go. Andrea, you got it.
Hi, I just had a question about, I've seen a real increase in training by organizations like GUE in the tech diving arena. And do you think that they are putting enough rigor into their training programs that will help to address some of the issues that you've identified?
Let me even go broader first. I no longer teach, so I'm not worried about Patty or Nowie or BSAC annoying me or coming after me or whatever. I'll say whatever I want to say. I remember when I started diving in 1961, I only got certified in 74 because I couldn't rent tanks anymore. Couldn't get the tanks filled without being certified. And that's why I got certified, and then ended up being a dive master and an instructor and whatever. I remember going through a 115-hour course. And over the years, now we would keep the standards up, and Patty was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Then now we had to compete with Patty. So now we got shorter and shorter and shorter. And BSAC was holding up the standard, but there were BSACs, out of Europe and England. So there wasn't anybody left. I mean, YMCA even, sort of stepped out of that mode. So out of all of the agencies, we try to make this easier and easier. And I've had this argument with the guys at Patty for years, which is that they and other agencies want to make it seem like diving is for everyone. It's for the entire family. I don't know a family that can play tennis together, much less go diving. So it's all about money, and it's all about, as I've said at many of the DEMAs over the years that have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, is that there are too many dive shops, too many agencies for too few divers, and too many manufacturers. So now there are fewer manufacturers, there are fewer agencies, and there's still a whole bunch of dive shops, but there are fewer divers. I mean, when I started diving, you had to be a water rat, and we were all water rats, and we became divers. Now it's a checklist of, I can go skiing or skydiving or diving, whatever. And okay, so now take the tech side. To me, it's not whether it's tech or it's recreational diving. It's who's the instructor. It's up to the instructor. If I wanted to teach the 100 Ways to Die lecture, and Patty defied us in doing that, and now he eventually defied us to do that, I would do it anyway. So on the tech side, if I had Jeff Bozanik teaching me about rebreathers, I know I'm getting what I need to know. There are others in that field I don't trust. So to me, no matter how much an agency waters something down or not, it falls on the instructor. And I'll give you one instructor story, which goes back to years ago when I was teaching instructors. I was an instructor trainer. I had 7 candidates, at a place called Dutch Springs, which is our quarry where we train people. And we're standing at the bottom of the hill, and the compressor building was up at the top of the hill. And I have 7 of them, and they all have tanks in front of them. And I'm asking them to gauge their tanks. And I purposely had one of the tanks a steel 72. All the rest were aluminum 80s. And I said, okay, everybody tell me how much, give me the signals, tell me how many air you have. And it was 3,000, 2,800, 3,100, 2,900, 2,100, 3,000. And I looked at the one who said, 2,100. And I said, gee, why do you only have 2,100? I said, well, I guess I got to go up to the filling station and get it topped off. I said, I think you should do that. Why don't you climb up the hill with the tank and go get it filled? He gets halfway up the hill, huffing and puffing, because this is a steel 72. And I say, stop, come back down the hill, put your tank next to the other tanks. Do you see anything different? You have to understand, this is an instructor candidate. Didn't know the difference between a steel 72 and an aluminum 80. So tell me, who trained him? How much experience did he have? So it's not the agency, it's the instructor. That's my humble opinion.
I mean, what I can tell you is I've been teaching, I don't teach basic class at all anymore. But, for those of you who have either I've taught or you've seen me teach, I'm still a dinosaur. I like to lecture. I like to do pools. I like to do a lot of water work. And what I say to people is in 40 years of teaching divers, I've never had anyone come up to me and say, Ken, you taught me too much. But you certainly hear people say, I didn't get enough in my basic class. And a lot of times too, it is the tail wagging the dog. And as Mike said, it's, this one goes a little down, this one gets, it's a competitive thing. And there's always an assumption from an instructor standpoint, for those of you who either are instructors or might become instructors, or just dive with people who you think they have too high an opinion of themselves, that, there's always an assumption that, we can dumb the classes down because we'll get you for the advanced class, or we'll get you for the rescue class, or this or that. Well, the reality is, if taking the industry statistics as correct, I want to say about 85% of the people who dive, the only class they're ever going to do is the basic class.
Yep.
So if you don't load it up, they're never going to be directly exposed to that kind of stuff. So how many of you have had a bad buddy before? And Glenn, if you raise your hand and it's me,
you say no.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. But where, what was it about the buddies that made you bad, and what did you do to change the circumstance? For anyone who raised their hand. Robin, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm NAUI and LACC 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I always felt that NAUI taught you more in a basic class. They charge you more money. It was more involved. And if somebody took one class, they took that NAUI class, they were safe enough to get out of trouble if they got into it. Where my opinion of Patty has always been, to put another dollar in. They teach you just enough to realize, oh my gosh, this could kill me. Let me take a second course. But a lot of people don't go that far. So I'm just a real big NAUI advocate.
Yeah, I was very proud to be a NAUI instructor, a lifetime NAUI instructor. My number's 7914. So how far back I go. And very proud to be. There was a change that took place not that many years ago, where NAUI had to survive, and they've changed how they do things. So
do you know Dick Stride?
Sure.
Yeah, that's who I learned from.
You learned right.
The only woman who passed the test to get into his class.
Well, things were different back then. Anyway.
Yeah.
So how have some others of you solved bad buddy problems? And deciding never to dive with that person again, if you survive the dive you're on, is an acceptable answer.
Well, I tend to to start at the beginning. A lot of times I'm on a boat with a casual buddy, if I'm on the boat alone, and I just go to the basics. I had a discussion with dive training, Dale, and told them at the dive show, I said, you know, I really miss the checkoff sheets that used to be in dive training periodically, because they delineated what was normal. And to Mike's back to Mike's talk, it seems like divers are for the most part explorers anyway. And I'm old enough to know that people are on a continuum, and it's just a question of how aggressive they are. But what I have seen is that people have been diving for a long time and they just get complacent.
Yeah.
And, you know, forget or don't care.
And just so you guys know, Glenn travels a lot around the world to dive destinations. So, and a lot of times by himself. So he gets up there. John, you got Mr. Wentworth, you have something to add there? Or are you just waving at us? You're agreeing with Glenn. If you're talking, John, you're muted. John's trying to find the unmute button now. I think.
I was
There you go.
waving. I was waving goodbye. I needed to go. I was really struck by the way that you phrased it. Like we used to talk about it in terms of people who stop believing that the laws of nature applied to them, which is the lack of mortal fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I apologize. I got to go. But wonderful time. Thank you so much.
Good
Thank you,
seeing you, John.
Thank
So
you.
here's a question for the rest of you to put into practice some of the things Mike talked about. Do you feel comfortable telling someone you just met on a boat either that they're not a good enough diver or you don't feel comfortable diving with them, or would you just tough it out? Oh, someone's brave enough to try and answer.
Yeah,
So what
I'll do that.
Oh.
I'll mention that.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, I've actually been in a situation like that since I travel quite a bit as well. And a lot of times I'm on a boat with just myself. I don't have a buddy with me, and I'll select a buddy or meet somebody at the resort. And I've had that discussion with people, and I've made a decision a number of times simply not to dive and just take a nice boat ride. I'd rather do that than put myself at risk.
And are those situations then where you had to dive with that person? That was the only option? Could you have dove with someone else, or you just didn't want to push it that way?
Well, I think everybody had already chosen a buddy, and I felt it'd be kind of a third wheel, and I decided just to have a nice boat ride and maybe just snorkel around the boat, but not dive with that person.
And the person you chose not to dive with, what did they do? Did they just go off and dive with someone else, or what? Or by themselves? Or
a number of times they went by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin?
It's happened to me a few times, and I'll go to the dive master on the boat and say, I will not dive with that person again. I need to be can I just join your group? Easy.
And again, if you're a dive master, I mean, when we at Reef Seekers were doing sort of a lot of local trips, my guys were all empowered to say, don't dive. I mean, or match you up with someone else. Stacy Carr, Stacy's actually using the little hand raising thing, and I just saw it.
Oh, wow.
Stacy, that's okay. Stacy, what you got?
You got a few things by now.
That's
Well,
okay.
I thought you guys would get a kick out of this one. One time I was talking to a guy someplace. This was in a non-diving setting, and he was of this sort of reckless personality type that we've been talking about, very egocentric and with multiple, I think, brain injuries to prove it.
It wasn't me, right?
No. Anyway, this guy asserted that he was a good diver because he's a Pisces.
Oh, great.
Well,
Perfect. Right. Yeah.
I did not invite him to go diving with me.
I like that. I like that. I mean,
but I also wanted to bring in other, like, just sort of another approach to this topic, because you know, for a while there I had a dive buddy. I mean, and some of us that don't go out very much, and as we're aging, you know, our own fitness levels you know, start to play a role, obviously. And, you know, people being unrealistic about what their own physical capabilities are or might be, especially in some sort of a, you know, dangerous situation that they hadn't anticipated. And so, like, to bring that up, like, I went up, John Lum's on this, and John and my former dive buddy did the rescue class with him, because my dive buddy was much larger and somewhat older than me, and I just didn't feel comfortable. So I attempted to take matters sort of into my own hands in a way, to make sure that we were as safe as we could be when we went out diving. But I don't dive with that person anymore because of the fitness issue, and I just feel like it's unsafe. So so there's that. And yeah, and also just when people aren't going out enough, I think a lot of times people think they can jump back into it when they haven't been diving for an extended period of time, and that seems reckless to me too. So I just wanted to throw those different aspects into the
And they haven't tested
conversation.
their gear, and they haven't tested the gear, and probably have old
Right.
batteries in their computers and things like that, and stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really worries me post-COVID, because we've had people that have been out of the water for a year or more,
Right.
And their skills have certainly degraded.
one
Yeah.
of the things, I was just in Socorro in January, and one of the things we talked about before we started diving was, hey, everybody, you all haven't been diving in a year. This first dive is at best a refresher dive. Don't push it. And luckily, everybody came back okay. Carol, you got your hand up.
Yes, I was going to say, it's not just dive buddies. I've actually asked to be moved from a dive master. It was on a Socorro trip, and we had a young'un, and he was all over the place. And I just couldn't do it. He'd go against current, and then with current, and then against current, and then across current, and, you know, and I finally went, guys, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And that brings up another point. You know, what do you do when you're on? And I'm not saying this is an answer, but you know, what do you do when you're on? You know, it's a paid trip, and you don't like the dive master, and you definitely should speak up, if not to the dive master, to whoever. Everybody works for somebody. So it's like Carol was with me, you know, in Yap, and if we didn't like the person in Yap, talk to me as the trip leader, or talk to Bill Acker as the owner of the resort, or whatever. It wasn't on Yap, right? What, Carol?
Nope, it was Socorro.
Okay. Anything else?
It
Have we-
seems to me that you know, everybody who's here has a good head on their shoulders, and you know, we're I think that as a group we're at, you know, kind of a higher level because we're interested in this, and we, mostly older folks, we realize that, you know, we're getting older, less fit, and out of practice for a year, but I worry about the younger ones. I've been on a trip to Coco's Island, and the whole boat was just interested in sharks, nothing else. And fortunately, the way I dive now, I'm just as content floating in the water as I am seeing, you know, exciting things. Yeah, maybe that comes with age and number of dives. I don't know.
A lot of it comes with age. Go ahead, Dan.
And wisdom.
Yeah.
And wisdom. And note that this is a self sort of clearing group. So the people who we really need to be listening to this probably wouldn't. So,
Yeah,
you know, here we are. And,
I-
you know, between
I-
Carl and Dan and myself, I don't know everybody else on the call, but the three of us probably have, I don't know, 130, 150 years worth of diving experience dealing with accidents, dealing with the end result of mistakes. And got to tell you that you have to be able to confront people who may end up injuring themselves and then injuring you or someone else on the dive trip or someone else on the boat. I ran groups for years, and there was a saying my wife Pat and I had that there's always a trip cootie. That's the person who everyone on the trip hates. But you have to dive with that person. So somehow or other, someone in the lead position has to sit down with the trip cootie and have a discussion. I was always picked as that person. So I would have that discussion with that whoever that person was, and they'd hate me for the rest of the trip. But I had to state it because nobody wanted to dive with that person.
Mike, there's a friend of mine that goes with me frequently, and he's a very well-known psychiatrist, and he mentioned the exact same thing you mentioned, but in terms of group dynamics, that he says if you have a group of people, they'll generally always eventually single one person out, and that person's going to be their target. So it's sort of like we say, there's always an asshole on the trip. I try to be that asshole for everybody, so the rest of you don't have to.
So
And
you don't
there are
have
too
to
many
do
laughs
that.
going on here of those who've been with me that know what's what, and they're agreeing with that. John, you got your hand up. What you got?
Yeah, I was diving with a person and they had all sorts of certifications, but they had taken one certification right after another. And the bottom line, when I dove with him, he was probably one of the worst people I dove with because he had no experience, no time in the water. Most of his time was just taking these certifications. It looked impressive, but he was a horrible diver.
I've had people when I was instructing and as a trainer, I've had people apply for an instructor rating with like 30 dives, which were the number of dives they needed to get through all of those certifications that they had, but they had no real experience. They had no real water experience. You run into that all the time. I expect that it's worse now than it was then, 20 years ago.
Well,
I've seen that as well, where there's a diver who's an instructor candidate or whatnot, and I remember when I was a dive master candidate, and it was like on some boats I was on. Oh yeah, how long have you been diving? Oh, just 2 years. I'm like, it's like you've just been like going up the rink, just like on this speed track. I'm like, are you really gaining, experience without, spreading out,
It's like being on the boat, and the dive masters have separated the more experienced divers from the less experienced divers. And one of the more experienced divers who's setting up the gear next to you can't figure out how to put the first stage on. And you're standing there saying, oh my God, I'm not going to say a word. And then they proceed to finally figure out how to get the first stage on and not realize that they've now put all of the straps and the BC and whatever on top of the line that holds the tank onto the railing. So, not saying a word, because when they try and pull that tank away, they're going to have a really tough time getting that tank up, which is going to be fine because it's going to waste a lot of their time.
Not to make it sound like patty bashing, but when you talk about lots of classes, no real experience, certainly in the 90s, and it was usually a patty guy, red windbreaker with all kinds of patches up and down the sleeve. And basically your skill, the quality of your diving was inversely proportional to the number of patches that you were wearing. So, but it does get tough, as you sort of alluded to, Mike. It is a dumbing down. I mean, when I got certified as an instructor, I think I had 2 years of assisting classes under my belt. I had about 300 dives under my belt, and seen some stuff. But now you do get people that it's 30 dives. They've never been in the ocean or something like that. And now they're going to take people over to Catalina and explain what's going on.
Well, here on the East Coast, I've been on a boat where I had a discussion. This happened many times, where a diver comes on to do a dive in the cold water here in New York, New Jersey, and their only experience is Caribbean diving. And it's the first time they're going to have a 1/4-inch wetsuit on or anything like that. And I tried to explain to them that they should actually be doing this with an instructor, guiding you and helping you, whatever, because you are a warm water diver. You are not a cold water diver. So
And they go, but I'm an instructor. I know what I'm doing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Carl, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I've seen here is that people aren't being taught the ramifications of what can happen when they make a mistake. People still know, sort of have a general idea of what the bends is, but I don't know how many people have been brought in with an air embolism that we've had to explain either to them or to their dive buddy or spouse what an air embolism was, because they had no concept. They were never taught anything like that. And if you don't understand the ramifications, then you don't know why you're doing some of these things, like don't hold your breath, don't come up too fast, and because you don't know the downside. And that's one of the things that probably needs to be taught more. It falls into that 101 Ways to Die While Diving lecture. That should be your very first lecture. At least it was back at the University of Michigan, at Lee Summers.
Yep. It's our world. Bromley.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else has observed this, but on several trips out to Asia in the last few years, seen absolutely appalling behavior where the DMs are pulling divers down from the surface and then swimming above them and adjusting the BCs, and the divers don't even seem to be aware of this. I just wonder what the fatalities are like, particularly in the Philippines. I think I've seen a lot of that.
Well,
I've seen a lot of divers being overweighted, purposely overweighted.
Yeah.
And this is crazy.
Well, I'll tell you a fun story. This actually happened to me. We were doing a dive at Farnsworth, and there was a woman on the boat. This was a Reef Seekers trip, so it was my trip. And I think she'd had like maybe 12 dives under her belt and had not been diving in like over a year or something like that. And I said, "You're not doing this dive." She says, "No, I'll be fine." I said, "No, you're not doing the dive." And what we finally decided was it was common enough condition, we were going to do 2 dives there. So I said, "Here's the deal. I'm going to go down and do the first dive with the people I intend to dive with. If everything's good, when I come back up, I'll do a surface interval. We'll do the second dive. I will take you down." She goes, "Okay." So everything's fine. I take her down on the second dive. We've got a couple of other divers and one of my assistants with me. I am literally holding her hand and taking her down to Farnsworth, and I'm holding onto her hand and I'm adjusting her BC for her. And at some point, as we got down, one of the other people in the group had a little adjustment needed. So I literally handed her hand to my assistant, helped this other person, grabbed her hand back up, now swam with her on the dive, adjusted her BC when I needed to, swam back. We get back to the line, we go up the line, we do our safety stop. I put her back on the boat. And the first words out of her mouth are, "See, I told you could do it all by myself."
Oh my.
So, sometimes we just don't have the perception of our own limitations that perhaps we should.
Well, it's 11:30 in New York City, and I want to, if I may, a couple of people on here, I just want to thank you for being on this call. I mean, Dan, thank you. Hey,
It's only 9:30 in Idaho.
hey,
So.
and Carl and Tabby. I haven't seen Tabby in 100 years. So this is great. Ken, thank you for asking me to do this. And it's wonderful.
Thank you for staying up.
Thank you, Mike.
Stay safe and well in a weird environment.
So now we can give
Thank you, Mike.
Mike his video and audio applause. I'll remind you that next month Zoom Seekers is on, wait, let me look. It's April 13th. It is Dr. Doug Ebersole. He's in Florida, so he's Mike's time zone. And Doug actually had COVID and is going to talk about diving in COVID and diving post-COVID and all things relating to diving in COVID. So we hope you'll join us with that for next month. So again, thank you, Mike Emmerman, for being with us. Thank you guys all for
thank you
coming back.
Ken,
And,
on that
yes.
COVID subject, everybody should know this is going to be a very hot subject because as Carl and Dan can attest, we don't know what the damage is to lung tissue relative to the experience of COVID. So, stay tuned to what's coming out of that.
And Doug is fantastic also.
Yeah, good guy.
He's really good.
And I met him at the Dan Fatality Conference back in 2010.
What a joyous experience. Yes.
It was. That was
Small world.
It was absolutely true. Absolutely true. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to hit the end meeting and boot you all out. Mike, thank you for staying up late. And
thank you, Mike.
See you all again soon.